Committee Room 5, South.
Of the scientific community in Scotland and some of the cutting-edge work that was being done, and we were knocked out by the... So I suppose my first question to both of you is just how you would assess the quality and quantity of science in Scotland, what we're doing right. Maybe if you want to maybe talk about some of the challenges, and we'll go into some of the specifics around that after that. But just your general assessment about what we're doing and how well we're doing, and just your view about where Scottish science is.
Well, perhaps I should start, and I'll bring Julie in a moment as the expert in this, but from a layman's perspective, having been in post for a little under a year, I've been blown away, as you say, both with the range of work that's been done, but also the fact that it's so much at the cutting edge. And that goes right across the scientific sector. I mean, I think the evidence is clear that all of our universities are conducting top-end research, and it's overwhelmingly to a very tangible purpose. But of course, as I said at the outset, there are always opportunities to develop that further, and we are very much in listening mode to the sector. For example, 3 weeks ago, Neil Gray, the Wellbeing Economy Secretary, as he was at the time, and I met with leading universities to discuss how we can collaborate better, both within Scotland and in terms of trying to bring in funding from out with. So doing extremely well at the moment, but can always do better. And it's really a case now, from my perspective, to work even more closely with the sector on areas for improvement. I'll bring Julia.
Yes, I would say that Scotland clearly has a history of being a fantastic science nation involved in research and development across most of the key sectors. We have 18 very high-class, high-performing universities, 26 colleges, which are very important in our skills agenda for science. We have institutes. And I think what makes Scottish science stand out, we're a relatively small country, but we've got a really good integrated science structure. So we're more collaborative than many other examples that I could mention. When it comes to the areas of science excellence, we've got some fantastic examples, such as renewable energies, health and life sciences, quantum computing and semiconductors, some of the physical sciences, and artificial intelligence, carbon capture and storage. So many examples of real science excellence, which I think describes our research clusters in Scotland. And we're moving very much now to exploiting that into the innovation agendas and making sure that we bring investment into Scotland and continue to deliver for the public across the country and, of course, elsewhere.
And if there were if I could highlight perhaps 3 areas where I think we do face a challenge and where we need to make progress. One would be around UK government policy and funding. And this is not a criticism, just an observation. I don't think is entirely alive to the different nature of the landscape in Scotland in terms of business, because we are much more focused in our economy on SMEs. And that's not always recognised in the offering that comes forward. We absolutely need to maintain international cooperation and collaboration. Obviously, we're welcome the fact that we're back in Horizon. However, there does need to be a recognition that this isn't about flicking a switch. It will take time for our institutions to get back up to speed and to rebuild the collaborations they had. And of course, we can't lose sight of the fact that we want to attract the very best talent to Scotland in the research space. And to do that, we need an immigration policy that's open and encouraging of that. So there's 3 areas where there is a bit of challenge, and it would be helpful to try and make progress with those.
I mean, these are the very strong themes that have come out in the evidence that we have acquired, and I think there's been a real plea for like a more joined up approach between UK and Scottish Government, and we'll touch on that. But I just want to ask about the Scottish Government strategy, the National Innovation Strategy set out in 2020 for 23 to 33. And I know it focuses on a number and trying to overcome the number of challenges for technological breakthroughs. Could you maybe just talk us through just a little bit about what you hope to achieve with this? I mean, I know you've set out some priorities, maybe just for the benefit of the committee. Could you lay them out to us and what you're hoping to do with this particular programme?
Well, there's a number of aspirations, but I can perhaps also touch on what progress we've been making, Chair, as well, in relation to those. So the key focuses in the strategy are building successful innovation clusters, developing an innovation investment programme, supporting innovation-led entrepreneurship and commercialisation, developing a national productivity programme, and of course measuring impact. But we've been, these strategies, as you know, are only worthwhile when they're delivered upon. So there's progress being made in a number of fronts. Since we published the strategy, we've begun work on our 2 flagship programmes of activity around commercialisation and investment. We've published the Entrepreneurial Campus Blueprint. We're actively working with the universities of Glasgow, Edinburgh and Strathclyde on their plans to develop their new Scottish Innovation Fund. There's work underway with our enterprise agencies on the Innovation Funding Review. And we believe that together, delivering on all of these will make a very clear impact on the offering that Scotland has.
Yeah, we've had lots of evidence on this from University of Edinburgh and University of Scotland, where they're talking about further cooperation with the UK government. We are obviously a select committee of the House of Commons, and I don't know if you could maybe talk us through some of the things that you've identified where that work together could be established. You've talked about innovation clusters. Is that a possibility, for example?
Well, I'd like to think that all of these things were a possibility. I mean, we need to be, I think the critical point here is it's in everyone's interest that the 2 governments work as closely as possible and try and avoid overlap and duplication. And I think sometimes it's about the culture behind the approach. And that's not an implied criticism. I just think that if we listen very closely to our university sector, research sector, and take our lead for what they're looking for, as far as that's possible, then that will give us, a pointer in the right direction. One of the areas that I think where we can work closely is on spin-outs. I think both governments are looking at how we deliver on that. And there's certainly areas where, from our conversations with our university sector, we realise that there is things that we could be doing there to support them. And it'd be useful to have conversations and make progress with the UK government in that space. What can they offer? What can we offer? So that collectively we're supporting our university sector to the best effect.
And
so Julie wants to
if I could just add, I think there's much we can do because we've been successful in Scotland in attracting an innovation accelerator, substantial funding to Glasgow. And we're very keen, of course, on the investment zones, which are co-funded by UK and Scottish Government. We've also got the Strength in Places innovation funding, which has been really important. And I'd like to back up what Mr. Day said about certain types of funding are more difficult for Scotland to attract from Innovate UK. And that's because those grants tend to be more easy to attract with big businesses. And as we have already discussed, Scotland is a country with many small to medium enterprises. So sometimes the fundings are not, the funding streams are not just as well aligned to our priorities as they might be to other parts of the UK. But lots of examples of where the innovation that's happening right across the UK is very complementary to what's happening in Scotland.
Okay, thank you for just for a short.
I should add.
We'll just move on, Graham, if that's all right. Just got short as your time. If we have got another opportunity, I'd like to ask a further question about our hiatus from Horizon. But it's now over to Alan Brown.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Graham. Just picking up on Julie had mentioned funding there, but the National Innovation Strategy seeks to take a more coordinated approach to increasing Scotland's share of the UK innovation funds. So what does that mean in practice? And, what kind of additional funding are you hoping that can be achieved in terms of percentages or whatever?
Just give me 1 second. So I'm just looking to see if I can come up with some figures for you. So at the moment, I mean, one of the problems with the Innovate UK funding is that our share at 4.1% is considerably lower than A, we would hope for, and B, what we would draw down from other areas. That's one of the reasons why we're looking for a joint meeting, the Scottish Government, University of Scotland, with Innovate UK to explore how we can develop that further. And my understanding is that they are amenable to such a meeting.
Okay, is there any indicative timescales for when that can start to move forward?
Sorry, I mean, I should say in fairness to them, I think we're just in the process of writing to them seeking that.
Okay.
I know that there has been dialogue going on between University of Scotland, the entire sector, in fact, with them about how this can be improved upon. And as I say, I understand they're receptive to it. We're intending to back that up, seeking a joint government and universities meeting, and to be constructive in this space. And as I say, I understand that they understand the problem and are willing to have those conversations. So far from being critical, I think there's an opportunity there for us to develop this further.
Okay.
I mean, there's been a memorandum of understanding developed already.
See, in the kind of wider investment sphere, the UK government has got a plan to raise public investment in R&D out with the southeast of England by at least 40% by 2030. So by inference, that would mean more money coming to Scotland for R&D in terms of that wider public investment. Has UK government raised that with yourself, and how they're looking to deliver that and increase that divergence of funding away from the southeast of England?
Well, it's clearly a very welcome commitment to move to that, and we have to play our part in delivering on it. Ensure that whatever's on offer is best suited to Scottish need. I can't say that I've been directly involved in that thus far, but I do know there have been initial conversations, and we very much look forward to developing that in Scotland's interests.
If I could just add, Scotland benefited very much from some of the levelling up funds under Strength in Places.
Sorry, Julie, just a minute. You maybe just come a bit closer to the computer you're using, so we could pick you up. Like planes going past and everything here, which is hearing you properly.
Just to say, Scotland did well under a funding initiative called Strength in Places, and that was addressing the point that's just been asked about levelling up across the country, with less investment going into the southeast of England and greater investment into other parts of the country. So initiatives like the Strength in Places, which identified areas of excellence in science and innovation, we really benefited from those types of approach. So more regional discussions on priority areas and real areas of science excellence, I think, are really beneficial for Scotland.
Okay, thanks. Just one more, just going back to Horizon, and obviously there was that pause in membership. And Graham, you spoke about need to, obviously, nation needs to obviously almost get put back in place. So I'm just wondering if anybody can quantify really what that break in membership in Horizon really means in terms of access to joint funding, joint projects, how long it will take where we were, when it pre.
Well, I mean, it's well known that Scotland more than punched above its weight in Horizon historically, and that's what we aim to get back to. I was simply making the point that it isn't simply flicking a switch and everything goes back to where it was. A number of universities have made that point to me directly, and it's not a gripe, it's not an excuse, it's just the reality that you need to get back up to speed, you need to rebuild those relationships. So it will take a little bit of time, but trust me, there is a very strong willingness here to do that. I mean, the return of Horizon has been incredibly welcome and welcomed in Scotland, but it'll just take, as I say, a little bit of time to get up to speed again.
Okay, thanks.
If I could just add that there are plans in universities and organisations to make sure the scientists who missed out during that gap in funding, that they're given the skills and the connections to make sure that they re-establish the links, which are the basis of the Horizon Europe funding.
But if you remember, we were garnering roughly 11% of the funding with a population share of 8%. So it was an area in which we did extremely well, and that is our ambition, to get back to that sort of level of activity. It'll just take a little bit of time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to our witnesses. Mr Day, could I start with you? Obviously, with responsibility for further and higher education, we're looking at the overall situation with education in Scotland and how we can encourage more people into STEM subjects, for example. But a lot of that development happens in the classroom at primary and secondary education. Yesterday, Jenny Gilruth said that she had not read the EIS report concerning the situation with teachers in Aberdeen. Have you read that report?
My understanding, Mr Ross, is that the report only reached the government today. So I haven't had the opportunity, because I've been travelling to attend this meeting. But you do, in your preamble there, touch on a very, very important point about STEM. I mean, that's at the heart of, it's the building block of what we're talking about today. And the Scottish Government has a number of, really important initiatives in place that I think have the potential to deliver in this area. And of course, our support for science centres, science festivals, etc., is well recognised. But we also recognise that there is a significant problem in this space around cracking the gender problem within STEM subjects and getting more young women into that. And every college and every university has a statutory duty to help tackle the gender issue in STEM. But I think we collectively have a responsibility there. And whilst, as I've identified, there's a number of important initiatives in place, we still have some quite considerable way to go. And if I'm honest, it's one of the things that troubles me most in this portfolio, how we do address this. And we're not alone in this in the world. Other countries have similar problems. But one of the things that we're looking to do is there was a review on gender balance across a multitude of disciplines that was prepared for us. And it's my intention to weave that into the overall reform work that we're doing. So it's simply part and parcel of what we do. But I readily acknowledge, and Julie's probably better placed than I am to talk about the gender issue in STEM, but we really need to do more in this space.
I'm absolutely going to come on to that if I can.
Hear me.
Right, just in a moment, if it's possible, because I want to ask specific questions based on your previous evidence that you gave us. So if it's okay, I do really want to focus on this. But just for clarity, Mr Day, you're saying no one in the Scottish Government received a copy of that EIS report until today, is that correct?
I said it's my understanding that the report was received today.
Mm-hmm. But we know publicly there are figures such as 42% of EIS members in Aberdeen reported violent pupil behaviour in school every day, and more than a third, 37%, said they'd been physically assaulted by a pupil. As an education minister within the Scottish Government, what's your response to that?
Well, clearly, those are concerning figures that have been quoted, absolutely. As you well know, my responsibility lies with colleges and universities, but the simple answer is it would be for the Scottish Government in general. Those are numbers that are concerning.
Okay, thank you. On STEM in particular, which is where I do want to focus my question, on the 23rd of October last year, when Professor Fitzpatrick appeared in front of us with her Royal Society of Edinburgh hat on, she highlighted the ongoing lack of diversity in STEM subjects. And I want to drill down a bit more with Professor Fitzpatrick in a moment. But Mr Day, how does the Scottish Government plan to address the issues that have been highlighted by Professor Fitzpatrick and indeed almost every witness we've had to this inquiry and indeed many of our other inquiries? And you mentioned some positive movement there about work you're going to be doing in the future, but this is not a new issue. So what have you done since you took up post and your predecessors done to improve the gender balance within STEM subjects?
these are not about future initiatives. These are initiatives that are already in place, Mr. Ross, because we absolutely recognise that women are underrepresented across the majority of the STEM sectors. And as I said, we're working to challenge gender stereotypes, providing funding to enable Education Scotland to develop a range of professional learning resources. But in the longer term, to pick up, to look ahead, there is what we're doing now, but there is also that longer term piece, and that falls into my remit in the context of the reform of the career service. And we need to look at how we present STEM subjects and opportunities and career openings for women, perhaps in a far better way. We readily acknowledge that. So there's the current work that's going on, which is some way to go, I accept. But also that longer term piece, because we have to be in listening mode here. We need to hear directly from those who've been caught up in this, who are involved in it, what it is that puts young women off getting into STEM careers. There are some interesting statistics as well from the pandemic, which show that when we moved away from the traditional examination approach for STEM hires, the uptake by young women increased quite markedly, and as did the pass rates. They went back down post-pandemic when we returned to the more traditional exam approach. And that's something I'm keen to explore, to see what's in that, what lies behind that statistic, because I think we should leave no stone unturned in trying to find a solution to this issue.
And I don't think you were being critical. My question was based on, because I think you said in response to my first question that you were looking to launch something going forward. But you're right to highlight what has been done to date. But is it not a reflection that that has not worked, that we have Professor Fitzpatrick and almost every other witness saying this problem is still there, it's stubbornly there, and in some cases it's getting worse? So what kind of review has been done to the actions taken by the Scottish Government to date? What's worked, what hasn't worked, and what could be improved going forward?
I think there's your question betrays a slight misunderstanding of the situation with respect. I think what you're finding is not so much criticism from the various sectors, but a recognition that this is a stubborn problem, as you have said. And everyone is bringing forward ideas. There's been some interested piloting work done. I'm very much listening. What I actually said in the Scottish Parliament, I'm not sure if you were there at that point, that I was open to hear ideas from across the chamber, because we haven't, and it's not just Scotland that has this problem. There is an international issue here. Some countries are better than others. And we need to be willing, first of all, to recognise we have that issue, and we do, and then be quite focused in trying to identify the causes of it and what we do to address that. But I think everyone is engaged in this in a constructive way, because there've been many things tried over a number of years without actually cracking this. And this is a genuine offer, if you have any thoughts yourself, I'm more than willing to listen to them.
Thank you. Professor Fitzpatrick, you were looking to come in earlier.
Yes, it was really just to say we do recognise the gender issue in STEM subjects, but I see it as certainly a national and in many cases an international issue. It is difficult to get girls to see these as career options. I think within the Scottish Government, what we have been doing is linking very much with the Institute of Physics, the Royal Academy of Engineering, trying to support them in what they're trying to do with a number of initiatives across some of these critical technologies. And I think there is an increasing recognition that that needs to happen in the early years in primary schools. One of the great things that we see in Scotland are the support of the 4 science centres, Glasgow, Aberdeen, Dundee and Edinburgh. And there's quite a lot of information that even one visit by a young person to a science centre can give them that boost. You know, people make decisions based on single visits or single experiences. So I think that's something that Scotland is doing very well. But I think wider than that, not just on gender, you know, there is a review of skills in Scotland, and I think we need to really focus on skills across everyone, because we need more scientists, technicians, engineers, mathematicians. We need those. And it's not all university graduates. We need all sorts of levels of skills. And that's not a gender issue. That's going to be a volume issue. And that's why we need to make sure that we continue to do, as you're suggesting, to try and get more young people interested in science subjects.
And that's certainly something I think I've repeated this in both parliaments, that all of our inquiries, be it shipbuilding and defence, be it the space sector, the science one, is speaking about a limited pool that they are looking to get their talent from. And we're really going to struggle. We've got so many areas where we can do really well in Scotland, but the numbers are just not there. Just finally, though, on STEM and particularly the gender imbalance, you highlighted back in October, particularly the attrition rate. So there's an awful attrition of women leaving the sector, particularly after they've studied. What is the issue there? Have we got, certainly in our other witnesses, they couldn't really put their finger on why so many decided to maybe take up a course, graduate with qualifications and then not go into the sector. What are the government or advisors looking at to keep more people, and particularly women, into the sector once they have gone through that education process?
So attrition rates are something in general that we're looking very closely at, Mr. Ross, because if you look at apprenticeship attrition rates, college attrition rates, there is a problem there. And I think part of it is people not fully understanding or fully appreciating the nature of the career path that they're going down. And that won't be the case with everyone, but it is with some. And I think for the longer term piece, one of the things we're looking at is to try and build in more to the careers offering that we have, a degree of work experience, if you want to call that, tasters of these courses, to better help people understand if it is really for them. But in the STEM space and with women in particular, I think it's really important, and there's perhaps a challenge in there, that we actually spend a bit of time engaging with the individuals who have dropped out to fully understand why that is the case. And I think that's perhaps take away from this exchange for me to take forward, because I think we need to better understand why it is we have that issue.
Yep. Thank you both. Thank you, Chair.
Supplementary from David Duckett, very quick one, and thanks both Mr. Day and Professor Fitzpatrick for coming along today, albeit virtually, and apologies to the committee for being a little bit late. You guys on screen probably didn't see me sneak in. But just to follow up on something Douglas Ross said there about the other inquiries that this committee has done on issues like defence, energy, space has been another one. These are all policy areas that are reserved to the UK Parliament, but each one of those inquiries involved witnesses telling us that exactly what we've just been talking about, the issue of getting STEM qualified people from right across the United Kingdom. So on that basis, I was just wondering what proactive moves the Scottish Government have been making in working with the UK departments for energy, defence, education, in fact, on trying to expand on that available pool.
So we have plans quite shortly to launch a talent attraction programme, and we don't seek to mask the fact that many of the talented people we already attract are coming from elsewhere in the UK, and we'll continue to tap into that market. You're right to highlight this. There are some short-term problems that these sectors have identified, and we are engaging very closely with them on that short-term piece. We have to do that. But there is also the longer-term piece that we're working with them on, which is to build the Indigenous talent pool, if you want to call it that. And that includes that piece about the whole careers offering, how we encourage more young people into these areas. There may be an element of reskilling and upskilling in there as well. So I can assure you that there is a considerable conversation going on with these sectors and others that we could talk about to look at the issue. But one thing I would just touch upon here is that within all of that work, we are being very careful to differentiate between skill shortages and workforce shortages, because there is, as you will appreciate, a key difference here. And all my portfolio colleagues that I'm working with on this are doing that piece of work about differentiating between the two. Well, we're also doing that work directly and connected to our universities and colleges to identify what specific qualifications, what skills is it that the employers need, and are we currently in a position in our institutions to deliver that? If so, let's get on and do it. If not, how do we identify a mechanism for providing that training? And in some instances, that will involve employers. And I'm thinking, we know what we need currently in terms of skills, and we should be able to deliver that. But if we're looking to the next 5, 10, 15 years as a horizon, what sort of changes in the skills ask will there be? And how do we ensure that, for example, the degree qualifications that are on offer absolutely meet the needs of these employers?
Thanks. Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much. Thank you both for joining us. I wonder if we could move on a wee bit now to the funding model for research organisations, universities. Do you think the research excellence framework is the best way to determine the allocation of research excellence grant funding?
Well, you have to have a formula of some kind, and I'm sure that there are people would find reason to find fault with it. Those others who would consider it to be the most appropriate way to go forward. I think where I do feel there needs to be some improvement on is to work with the sector to make it less bureaucratic than it currently is. And I know that's a view that's shared elsewhere. We need to make this easier to access, but there must always be some sort of measure of standard of performance. And of course, within that, there will be winners and losers. I'm interested, has the committee had any recommendations on an alternative to the framework?
No, I think we were rather hoping that you might have some ideas on that format, being the specialist rather than ourselves, to be absolutely honest. But we have heard that the existing funding mechanisms are perhaps better suited to big businesses. And you said yourself there could be winners and losers, and that puts SMEs, sort of dominated research, at a disadvantage. Do you recognise that? But more specifically, do you feel it works for the universities?
I haven't heard anything to the contrary that it works for the universities. On the list of things that universities raise with me, that's not something that has featured. And they, as you might imagine, they raise quite a lot of items with me. On the point about SMEs, that's an important issue. And I want to take away and reflect on that about how the extent to which it takes account to the specifics of the Scottish economy. I'm not aware that it doesn't, but we'll reflect on that because it's a fair question.
I simply ask about the universities because
to that, no system is perfect.
Sorry, carry on.
Oh, sorry. Just to say, no system is perfect, but I do think the research excellence framework is considered internationally as a good way of objectively assessing performance of organisations. So it focuses on outputs and impact, not on activities, and that's really key. So I think that's good. It does that, and there's an increasing emphasis in REF on impact. In other words, what does society benefit from the outputs of universities? And I think that's a good thing. There's a move now to take more recognition of the culture and the environment of universities. And again, I think that's a good thing. They're looking at diversity. They're looking at a broader social impact, a broader economic impact from universities. And that's part of the assessment. So in general, I think it has a lot of benefits. The bit about the SMEs, it just makes it harder for some of our Scottish universities to get some of the very big grants that some of the English counterparts will get because they have big businesses in their cluster areas. So that, it makes it more challenging for research income generation, which is also assessed through REF. But Scotland still does very well indeed, because we've got excellent universities, and they attract funding from, you know, international businesses, not just local businesses, but commercial businesses around the world.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Shanks.
Thanks very much for your time this morning, both of you. I just want to follow on from Christine a little bit and ask specifically about the Regional Innovation Fund, which I think was around £60 million on a UK basis, of which I'm assuming you can maybe correct me here, but around £6 million has come to Scotland. And I'm just wondering specifically what the Scottish Government's proposal is to spend that money on, and whether there's going to be an element of that spent more on teaching in universities rather than directly on research, which is what it's been spent on in England. I just wonder if you have any idea at this stage.
So I think Scotland's share of that was 5.8 million, if I remember correctly, and that was passed to universities a few weeks ago with a view to conducting research in line with the type of thing they do. There was a reference to some degree of focus on education within that.
I think the reason I'm asking is that the fund was set up, I mean, it's specifically called Regional Innovation Fund, but it was to fund innovation activities. And I'm just wondering, has that money been passed directly to universities for that purpose, or has there been any sort of connection with other outcomes of the Scottish?
It is directed to drive innovation, and it was passed from the SFC to our universities. And I know from my conversations with University of Scotland that money will be put to good and effective use. There's no doubt about that.
Just on the same topic around other funds, in terms of the Flexible Workforce Development Fund, can you hear me okay, Mr. Dare?
Sorry, yeah, the sound is coming and going. That's why I'm making faces.
No, it's fine. There's not a microphone right in front of me, so it's maybe our end. Apologies. So the Flexible Workforce Development Fund, which Colleges Scotland has said that the cut in the budget this year will mean 45,000 learners missing out. And the reason that I think this is particularly important for science is because often a lot of these learners are the people who will become the technicians and the lab assistants that drive a lot of this innovation. So what's the thinking behind the Scottish Government's decision to cut that funding completely?
Necessity, Mr. Shanks. It was unavoidable. In the context of the current financial year, we had hoped, despite the massive budget challenges, to deliver a fund of some amount, which perhaps backs up your point about its importance. In the context of the current year, it simply has not been possible to deliver that. This is without doubt the most challenging budget settlement situation we found ourselves in since devolution began. And it's a regrettable decision from my perspective, but it's been necessary. What I'm looking to do in the context of going forward as part of the reform agenda is to look actively at what we might be able to do in that space as we move forward through the next few years, because I do recognise the importance of this fund and how it's been utilised by our colleges and others over recent years. So it's not something that we particularly wished to do, but it's it's been unavoidable, unfortunately.
And related to that, it's been quite difficult to try and track down how the apprentice levy has come back to Scotland. Do you have an idea of how much money has come to the apprenticeship levy, and do you have any kind of top level and redistribution?
So Mr. Shanks, the honest answer to that is we don't know how much comes back to Scotland, because since it was consolidated in the block grant, it's impossible to tell. Now, the numbers that I've seen on a UK level have shown the spend in England coming down as well from the level it was at. What I can say to you is that we spend a very substantial amount of money on apprenticeships. Now, it comes in two forms currently. One is the fees that are paid out, the monies that you would automatically associate with apprenticeships. But then, of course, there is the credits that are provided to colleges, which they draw down where they are providing the training. Put together, those are two very substantial amounts. And it's one of the reasons why we intend to consolidate those two sums of money in one location to provide, I think, better value for money, so we get more bang for our buck, if you like, but also around transparency, so we can properly understand the cost of apprenticeships. Because as I'm sure you appreciate, different apprenticeships come at a different cost. For example, if you're providing stonemasonry apprenticeships, there's a very additional sums associated with that because of the kit that you require, perhaps set against retail apprenticeships. So I want to develop a much more transparent model that will give people a clearer idea of what's involved in apprenticeships. But we will also be focusing more going forward on the needs of the economy. We're trying to identify the key priorities. Now, there will always be things that you require to do in the apprenticeship space, absolutely. But what are the key needs of the Scottish economy that need to be prioritised within the apprenticeship offering? To go back to your original point, I can't give you exact numbers, but I am satisfied from the figures that I've seen that we spend, if we were to be getting a population share of the apprenticeship levy, a very substantial amount of money in that space on apprenticeships. I think we could spend it more effectively, and that's what we're looking at now.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I asked the question just because it does seem strange that across the whole of the UK there isn't a very clear breakdown of where the apprenticeship levy goes, and I know there's been questions asked in Scotland about it as well, so it's just to see if that is the same picture, so thank you for that. The final question...
Just to be clear, of course, Mr Shanks, sorry, can I just be clear? Of course, there are fundamental differences between the two systems, and it's not to sort of sit in judgment of the merits of them, but in Scotland, non-levy payers can access apprenticeships in Scotland in a way they can't in England. And one of the things I'm keen to explore further is how we improve access to apprentices for SMEs, because I've seen some conflicting numbers about the access to apprentices for these types of businesses, and I'm keen to get to a place where we can better support them, because it's self-evident that when you have an economy that's so predominantly dominated by SMEs, it's important that for the future well-being of their companies and the strength of their companies going forward, they have a continuation of workforce behind that.
Thank you. So just finally, and it touches a bit on that point around the funding pots that are available to people and whether there's maybe a need for more of a kind of localised model to that. So do you think at the moment the balance is right between the local funds that are available and more national funds like the REG is right? And there's a supplementary, I suppose, about whether some of the existing funding schemes, like the one that goes through the Royal Society, for example, might be another route that we could go down, or we could expand that route slightly. We've heard from some researchers that more locally distributed pots might make it easier for them.
Yeah, to understand your question in the initial, at the start of it, were you talking about localised funding for apprenticeships, for example?
Just research and innovation generally. So it could be further education, could be higher education, but just that funding that's available.
In the research space?
Yes. So if we look, one of the pieces of evidence from the Royal Society of Edinburgh said that smaller funding pots would allow more local priorities to make it into research fellowships and small project grants, but the amount of funding is extremely small because it's over applied for in national schemes. So I'm not suggesting one's right and one's wrong. We're just trying to understand, is the balance right?
Well, I'm not going to put Julie on the spot when she represents the RSE wearing a different hat.
Here with that hat.
I mean, I guess it's an interesting question, but if one looks at the number of funds that come in to our Scottish institutions from elsewhere that are then having an impact locally, there's a stat about the 15-mile radius impact that a lot of the work of our universities has. So there is a balance struck there. Again, it's not something that I've had the universities come to me and ask, could we look at that? But I'm amenable to having those conversations if that's something that they felt was worthwhile. But it has to be said, our universities have a very local impact as well as a national and international one.
And if I could add, our universities are distributed not evenly across Scotland, but there's a reasonable distribution. And we have universities such as the University of the Highlands and Islands, which has multiple campuses, similarly with the University of the West of Scotland. And another source of local and regional funding is through our enterprise agencies, Scottish Enterprise, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and our South of Scotland Enterprise area, which is a new one. So, there's roots of local research and innovation monies can also come through those as well as through the universities. And of course, not just saying it because I'm from the RSE, but the Royal Society of Edinburgh does have some funding which comes from the Scottish Government, which they spend on specific initiatives, some of which are local, some of which are international.
And then, of course, in addition to that, you have the city, region, and regional growth deals as well, which are directly connected to individual universities and localities, quite successfully so. So there is a bit of that flowing through, but in the context of your original question, it's not something that's overly been raised with me up till now.
Thank you. Thank you. And just on that very point, Professor Fitzpatrick, we've heard very positive things about some of the funding allocations that the Royal Society of Edinburgh has been given to some of the science projects across Scotland. I don't know if the Minister feels that there's maybe a need to look at further such pots and seeing if we could get a more balanced approach to funding investment into some of our science projects in Scotland.
Well, I'm sure the RSC would appreciate your question, Chair, because no doubt they would like to have funds to distribute. I mean, I think, and I hesitate to say this because it sets hairs running, but I think we're in a space in the post-16 education arena where we ought to be open to considering any sensible suggestions if we can demonstrate that they have benefit. I've said since I came into post as Minister that we need to have a can-do attitude and a willingness to consider sensible proposals that come before us. So if someone can come to me and make a case within the existing funding envelope that would allow us to do that with no detriment to important things that we already fund, then of course we'd be amenable to considering those.
Just lastly from me about spin-outs, and I know you were keen to talk about this, and I'll give you the opportunity just to give your view about where we are in terms of some of the spin-out issues. And some of the things that's been brought to our attention in the sessions we've held, some of the evidence that we've acquired is like complaints have ranged from a lack of infrastructure, particularly lab space. There's been a sort of mixed response about support when it comes from the universities about who people would go to in order to try and discuss some of the operations around their spin-outs. There's issues to do with intellectual property, about who owns that, about how that's shared. I just wonder what your view is about that and what more you could do to support spin-outs across our university sector.
Well, certainly in my time in office, I've seen firsthand some fantastic spin-out projects that have been hosted and developed by our universities. I guess the point you raise about, for example, lab space is one that's been highlighted to us. In fact, a few weeks ago when Neil Gray and I met with the universities, that was one of the topics of conversation. So we've undertaken to work with them closely to see what we could do to better facilitate the innovation and the spin-out startups, etc. What can we provide by way of infrastructure? What can we help create by way of infrastructure? But of course, ultimately the universities, the individual universities are in charge of the offering that they're making. And I know that these are developing themes in a multitude of localities, in terms of, if you take, for example, Glasgow invested heavily on a fantastic facility. But when I visited it a few months ago, it was already full, and they were then working on what would happen next. So that they were able to host up to a certain point, but then they needed additional space beyond that. And of course, there is that bugbear about we have tended in Scotland to take startups so far, and then we've tended to lose them to elsewhere. So we do need to look closely what more we can do in terms of pulling in international investments so that they can continue to develop in Scotland.
I mean,
So we absolutely reckon. Yeah.
Sorry, I know we've got a delay down this line, but the other thing that we did hear very positives about was the role of Scottish enterprise in helping commercialisation and helping to scale up. I'm just wondering how we bring all that together, the activity in the universities, the operation in Scotland. And, sorry, this delay seems to be getting worse. The Scottish enterprise and the engagement in the university sector itself. I wonder what more we could do with all that together to support spin-outs and commercialisation of IP.
And I think that's a very timely question, Chair, because that is what we're looking at currently with the universities, with our economy colleagues and ourselves. How do we bring all of that together to better effect? And I have to say that the meeting we had was entirely constructive. There was no sort of, we should be doing this, we should be doing that in a negative sense. It was looking at the positives of what we do and how we take those forward. And I'm certainly committed, and I know other ministerial colleagues are, to working very closely with the university sector to better cash in on this opportunity.
And just lastly, a very quick supplementary from Douglas Ross. Sorry, Julie, but we've not got much time. I know Douglas is wanting to come in with one last question before we get UK ministers in. Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. And it was just on the back of Professor Fitzpatrick rightly praising the University of the Highlands and Islands. Obviously, one of their campuses is in my Murray constituency, Murray College, based in Elgin. Yet my postbag is full of concerns from staff whose jobs are under threat and students whose courses may be discontinued and opportunities to study locally no longer there. I wonder, Mr Day, what your response is to the situation at Murray College at the moment and what the Scottish Government can do to assist those who are currently studying there and those who want to study there in the future.
So there's two strands currently underway, Mr Ross, in relation to Murray College. UHI themselves have been actively engaged in supporting the college there, but also the SFC. They have been extremely active in that space, working with the college around their needs. There is no doubt that we need to get that college and others onto a more sustainable footing. And I can give you the assurance that in both instances, there's some considerable work going on behind the scenes to assist the institution to get itself into better shape.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Minister, for joining us today. It is good to see you again, Professor Fitzpatrick. Anything that you feel you could more usefully contribute to our committee, please get in touch. We'll be happy to receive any representations. But I think we managed to get beyond some of our little technical difficulties, and we managed to get everything that we require. But thanks for attending today. Order, order. There'll be a brief suspension until we get our next guests in. Thank you.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is currently suspended.
order and welcome back to the Scottish Affairs Committee in our ministerial session, this time with UK ministers who I will now allow to introduce themselves, who they are, and perhaps introduce your colleagues who are accompanying you. We'll start with you, Minister Griffith.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members. I'm Andrew Griffith. I'm the Minister in the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, and my responsibilities are for science, research and innovation.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Committee. I'm John Lamont, Parliamentary Under Secretary of State at the Scotland Office, Minister for Scotland.
And your colleagues, please. Mr Rocky, we're familiar with you, but please, for the record.
Good afternoon, Chair and Committee. I'm Lawrence Rocky. I'm the Director of the Scotland Office.
Mr Adamokin.
Good afternoon, Chair, and good afternoon, Committee. Alexander Adamokin, Deputy Director for Place, Impact and Research at the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your very concise introductions. I'd have to say I think this has been a very positive inquiry. We've received lots of good evidence. We've engaged directly with a number of scientific projects, breakouts, spin-outs, the university sector. I think we're finding quite a healthy, productive environment in Scotland for science, and based on our centuries-old tradition and innovation, creativity and invention. It's good to see that it's in reasonably good condition, but we're wondering why Scotland's got 11.4% of researchers in the UK and receives 5.9% of Innovate UK funding. Why are we getting such a low proportion of the funding, and why isn't it at least meeting their population share? Minister Griffith.
Thank you, Chair. And if I had made an opening statement, it would be very similar to your own about the ingenuity and innovation and contribution to science of Scotland. It's important to understand the way that funding generally works. This is true across almost all of the funding councils and most funding, which is that it is contestable. You have to apply for it in order to receive it. That's often the biggest hurdle and the best place to look if we all share the aspiration of Scottish businesses and institutions getting a greater share. Anticipating your question, I did look at what the statistics are. So if you look at application data, when Scottish entities make an application, and this is relating to Innovate UK, the success rate is 26.5%. The success rate for the UK as a whole is 23%, so Scotland is punching above its weight in terms of success, and in London it's down to a mere 19%. And if you look overall, researchers in Scotland are more successful with their applications to UKRI, the biggest source of funding, than those in England. 32% for Scotland, 27% for England. And when they do apply, again, not only are they more successful, then they tend to get more of the money they apply for at 33% versus 30%. So I think, to put it very bluntly, Mr. Chair, when Scottish institutions apply, when they compete, when they show up, they do very well. And let's have more of them showing up.
Okay, so it's their fault for not making these applications, and if there were now a glut of applications following this exchange, they would be looked at very sympathetically by the UK government.
Well, the data certainly suggests that the independent funding councils, to be clear, not this or any other minister, but the independent peer-reviewed funding councils do indeed seem to support those applications at a high propensity.
I would be anticipating and expecting a whole range of applications flooding into your department as we speak. But there's also been talk about that Innovate UK could do more to coordinate funding projects with other organisations, and what we heard was with Scottish Enterprise and Highlands and Islands Enterprise. What's the UK government doing to support a more joined-up approach to that type of funding?
Well, I hope there's a joined-up approach in every part of the United Kingdom. I mean, the big challenge can be awareness, and I'm certainly happy with my officials to take back if there's anything more we can do with any of the organisations or others that you talk about to drive awareness. Innovate UK is coming up with effectively a one-stop shop. I accept that across all of the research establishment, if you like, it can sometimes be hard to know where the place to go is. And so Innovate UK is doing a lot of work to present more of a one-stop shop for particularly small and medium-sized enterprises who we want to be the biggest beneficiaries of those. And if there are any institutions that would like to be part of how we can campaign and drive the awareness of Innovate UK, then, as I say, I and my officials are very happy to do that.
Okay, just lastly for me, because I know we haven't got much time with you gentlemen this afternoon, there'll be lots of pleas for more joint working between Scottish Government and UK Government, and we just heard from the Scottish Government Minister, and I think there's a readiness and keenness to secure that and achieve that. I'm just wondering what your view is about working together with Scottish Government and how much of a success that's been and what more could be done in order to ensure that there is that type of collaboration across the UK.
Yeah, there's plenty of examples where we are collaborating with the Scottish Government, many other types of institutions, whether it's centres of research excellence, of course, the finest Scottish universities who do prodigiously well out of the funding system. So nothing but the whole sector, if you like, the whole premise of research and innovation is based on collaboration. And there's no one in my department that would seek to raise any artificial barriers to that, quite the opposite. And I myself, Mr. Chairman, will be visiting both Glasgow and Edinburgh shortly and trying to meet with some of the leading institutions in both of those markets.
And I think we'll need to hear from Minister Lamont in the Scotland office. What are you doing? What's your role in terms of bringing that type of joint approach together and making sure that we're all joined up?
I think it's absolutely key that both the UK Government and the Scottish Government do work together. That's what our constituents want. That's what this sector wants. And I think when we do work together, there's many examples of the success that we can achieve, which I'm sure we'll explore across the next hour.
Of course we will. And now pass on to Anna Kaiser.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the panel for joining us today. For the interest of time, I'll come to John first. If anyone else wants to chime in, you're more than welcome to. So in Scotland, SMEs account for 99.4% of all private businesses in the science sector. Yet the committee has heard that SMEs often struggle to apply for the current funding schemes. So what is the UK Government doing to ensure that Scottish researchers aren't disadvantaged in funding applications?
It's a very good question. I was able to see for myself when I visited Edinburgh University a few months ago to see the James Webb Space Telescope at the Astronomy Technology Centre, I think it's called. And as part of that visit, as well as to see the telescope, which the UK Government's put about £20 million into some of the kits supporting that, we're able to see a incubator unit, which are for small SME businesses just starting up with scientists and others who have particular skills in research and product development being supported in terms of their business development. So I personally absolutely understand the importance of supporting SMEs. The government is also focused on supporting SMEs, startups and spin-outs, which are clearly often the driving force in innovation and the development of cutting-edge tech. 86% of Innovate UK's core funding is being invested in SMEs, and Innovate UK Knowledge Transfer Partnership are very well represented in Scotland, reflecting the depth of engagement that we have with the SME community.
Thank you.
If I may just add one thing. One of the three innovation accelerators, key focus for our department to try and help businesses and others innovate, one of those three for the whole UK is in Scotland.
So we've also heard that a mapping exercise would be welcomed by researchers in Scotland. So is this something that the UK Government would consider? Would they consider conducting such an experiment, such an exercise rather, to better understand the needs of the Scottish research ecosystem?
I personally have extensive engagement with the university sector in Scotland. If the committee decides to make a recommendation along those lines, certainly we will look at it as a department. But I'm confident that the discussions we have with the sector just now are giving us a very well-informed position in terms of UK Government decisions in this area.
In the meantime, I think since this committee started this inquiry, because it's new news, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology has launched a UK-wide map of clusters. Scotland features, as one would expect, very prominently in that. We've got the in-orbit space manufacturing clusters in both Glasgow and Edinburgh. artificial intelligence in Aberdeen and Edinburgh, gaming in Dundee, and energy storage across Scotland. So that is available, and I'll be very happy to share a link to that cluster map, which is dynamic, with the committee. And if there are any deficiencies or some clusters that we haven't yet found, then please do share that, and we'd be very happy to add them. The purpose is to act as a go-to place for those in the clusters themselves, although they will tend to know they're in a cluster, but also for capital, for investors, to engage with skills bodies and other inward investment.
Thank you.
It's very encouraging, and we look forward to seeing that. I think you mentioned the In Orbit in Glasgow and AI in Aberdeen.
In Orbit, space manufacturing in Glasgow and Edinburgh, AI in Aberdeen and Edinburgh. Okay. And just to be clear, one of the challenges of producing a map of the clusters is invariably colleagues pop up and say, what about my particular bit? And as I say, it'll be a dynamic exercise we're keen to hear.
It's certainly something we've heard from a number of witnesses that's been very helpful innovation, so I think this committee will welcome that. Michael Shanks.
You mentioned earlier on around spin-outs, and it's something that Scotland particularly does well in. We heard some evidence around the idea of there being some kind of standardised approach to spin-outs, particularly around negotiations and IP ownership, which is something that a number of Scottish spin-outs have struggled with in terms of the IP going with them when they expand elsewhere. So I'm just wondering, in the independent review of spin-outs, there wasn't a specific recommendation to look at a standardised approach. Can you explain maybe why that is, or your own thinking on it?
Yes. First of all, the spin-outs review, which I saw in both the Treasury and in this current role, has been very well received. It's a very good piece of work. The government has accepted its recommendations and has brought some new money behind spin-outs. It's an area where Scotland does well. I think the committee has the statistics, but Scotland universities in particular do very well on spin-outs. There's a proper debate, as one would expect, between the idea of sort of mandating a central template, and that has sometimes the attraction of simplicity, of being familiar to those who provide finance for university spin-outs wherever they may go, but also something that doesn't necessarily represent the tapestry of different maturities in spin-out activity as it relates to different universities, the different availability of capital, and also sectors. So you'll understand that we're talking about quite a different spread between manufacturing innovation spin-out and something in the life sciences or engineering biology. At the moment, the spin-out review identified so many good next steps that to mandate effectively a single outcome we felt was a step too far. But it's something we'll keep an open mind on. The key thing I think we could all agree on is having more spin-outs, the UK innovators having better access to capital and being able to hold on to their innovation longer is a really good opportunity for the UK.
And one of the things around exactly what you were saying there around support to spin out and stay in the UK, we were just hearing earlier around a number of concerns through things like lab space or getting the support to actually grow beyond it. And one of the things I'm interested in is Scotland does have huge scale in terms of SMEs, but is that because that's the only landscape we can have, or is there something around expanding these companies beyond SMEs that we're not doing? So in other words, do we have SMEs by accident or by design? And actually some of these, I mean, I met one spin out just last week that has huge growth potential, but really struggles with the infrastructure to make that growth. So what more could the government do to support that work?
You happy with that? I think the biggest thing, because invariably I meet a lot of spin-outs, a lot of the institutions that are hosting them, the biggest thing is predictable and greater volume of access to capital. That we as a country have done well with things like SEED, the popular SEED Enterprise Investment Scheme, venture capital trusts. There's quite a lot of capital available at the very early stages of those spin-outs' life. And what's colloquially called scale-up capital, when you start needing to go from a pure idea to investing in some of the physical facilities and the checks get bigger, is where we often lack that capital here in the UK. often that capital is available from around the world, but we don't have as much of an indigenous capital pool, if you like. That was what was behind things like the Chancellor's Mansion House reforms, some of the reforms to the financial services system to allow more of that capital to be investing in less liquid investments. Things that still deliver a very good return will be good for people's investments. And so that's the big intervention. Beyond that, as you say, there is a lot of need for things like lab space, access to supercompute, and again, Edinburgh will be hosting the exascale computer, which I would expect and hope would give startups and spin-outs the ability to access that really global class facility, without having to replicate that infrastructure themselves.
Maybe finally, just for Minister Lamont around, I asked Graham Day earlier around the UK Government's Regional Innovation Fund, which was 60 million and I think 5.8 million in Scotland. There's a concern from the university sector that instead of that being entirely spent on innovation, as it is in England, that some of it's being used for teaching budgets in Scotland, giving funding pressures on universities. Do you think there's a risk the Scottish Government's approach to university funding is hampering innovation in Scotland?
So certainly during my discussions with University of Scotland and various other universities, there is big concerns about the funding settlement they are getting from the Scottish Government, their ability to offer all the courses and you offer an attractive place for researchers to be based is becoming more and more challenging. I think all of us in this room once, as somebody who was a product of Glasgow University, we all want Scottish universities to be, as you were as well, are you not, Michael? We all want Scottish universities to be absolutely at the top of the leagues, which they have been for many, many years. But there is no doubt, from everything I hear from Scottish universities and those involved in that sector, that the funding settlement they're getting from the Scottish Government is leaving them shortchanged, and they're very, very worried about being able to maintain their position within the Premier League.
Just on spin-outs, we've heard that researchers often lack access to independent support outside the university they're spinning out from during the commercialisation process. Is there anything that the UK Government can do to assist and help that, and is it a problem that you recognise? Either or both of you?
I mean, I don't want to say it's not a problem I recognise, because there's always more that can be done. The majority of the policy-based conversations we have with spin-outs are the ease of dealing with the institution, and that's where the spin-out review can help. There are guidelines, there are more networks, even in the absence of standardised templates. There are initiatives like 10U that get groups of universities together to simplify that. Access to capital, as I said, Mr. Chairman, is the big one that seems the most universal. And then in individual areas or sectors, it can be about access to physical facilities or indeed to skills. As for what more the government can do, I think the biggest single thing government can do is create an ecosystem that rewards and incentivises that activity. If there are particular challenges and barriers, then I and other colleagues across different departments, of course, interested as part of our desire to make the UK a science and technology superpower and the best place to run and grow a business.
Just briefly, because this was fed back to us in a number of the sessions that we've held, is just support with IP. Is like there's a sense that a number of these businesses spinning out doesn't get the relevant necessary support and information that they require in order to try and make a success of their IP, make it work for them. Is that another issue that you recognise, and is there anything you're doing to try and address that?
Yes, there is a piece about upskilling and resourcing, what are called TTOs, the departments of universities and institutions that typically deal with that. It's not, it's an emerging area for the UK. We're doing it very well, but the scale and ambition that we'd like to do it at means that the spin-out and technology transfer space could benefit from some more upskilling.
Thank you.
That's the right word.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just start with yourself, John, if that's okay? We heard earlier on, we've heard actually repeatedly from universities and the like about the impact of the break in membership of Horizon, and basically that's been costly for research in Scotland in terms of both funding but also fundamentally the relationship with the European partners that now need to be built back up. Obviously need to get more access back to collaborative project working. So what discussions did you have with universities and the like in Scotland to listen to their concerns, and what's happening to get things back on track now that the UK has obviously committed back into Horizon?
Well, Minister Griffith probably can give more of the detail, but certainly it's true to say that University of Scotland have very much welcomed the new relationship that we have with the European Union, and we're now...
My question is what discussions you had about their concerns when there was the exit from Horizon, and what's been done to rectify that?
Well, they very much welcome the fact that the UK, this government, is restoring the UK's position as a key partner.
Never expressed any regret within
the Horizon Partner. Well, it's very clear, Mr Brown, that leaving the European Union is going to has presented a number of challenges, which this government has been very much focused on addressing. We now have a new trading relationship, a very positive relationship with the European Union, and I'm very pleased we have a new relationship under the Horizon scheme as well. But as I say, Minister Griffith has more of the details.
Yeah, and look, you'll forgive me, Mr Brown, I'm new in the role, but all I've heard from the sector to date is positive affirmation that we're now back into the Horizon programme, a recognition that whilst in the interim period the UK government did everything that it could do to protect researchers and institutions with the Horizon Europe Guarantee Scheme. That meant that over 3,021 grants worth over 1.4 billion were provided in that interregnum. Earlier this year, a few weeks ago, we launched a campaign to boost UK participation, accepting that there's always more that we can do. We're running a marketing campaign to drive awareness focused on small businesses, research institutions, and we are giving to encourage people to invest the time in making those Horizon applications, where the UK has always had a very strong track record, has always led a good proportion of Horizon projects. We're giving up to £10,000 to cover the cost of putting together a Horizon proposal, pump priming that, if you like, so that is less at the individual researcher's risk and more at the risk of the department. So that's putting our money where our mouth is, making sure that the UK gets back quickly to a position of really deriving full value out of its Horizon membership. It's not just Horizon, of course, it's Copernicus as well.
For getting back to where it was, effectively? That's his admission. There's a catch-up process in place, and the UK has missed out by that decision.
Well, my job is to wake up every morning and look forward and control what we can control. And what's within the gift of the department is to put all of our endeavours and some of our resources into maximising our participation. It's only one. I was recently up at the University of the Arctic in Tromsø. That's another really good international collaboration. Our funding councils are making sure that we're absolutely punching our weight in that particular collaboration, and there'll be many others across the world. But those are the things that we in the department can do.
And so, looking forward, as you like to look forward, and looking forward positively, what do we think the time frame is for getting back to effectively the status quo where the UK was within Horizon in terms of the number of projects, the funding, the collaboration, and you're saying UK leading? So it's kind of time frame to get back to where it was a few years ago.
It's entirely, I don't make the applications to Horizon as a minister or in any other capacity, so it's entirely within the control of the sector itself. As I say, the sector are very positive about that. They're very pleased we're back involved. The world is also very global. People want to collaborate with British science, from around the world, dealing with some of the biggest challenges as our society faces. That's not exclusively focused on Horizon, but I'm very pleased that as the world's biggest single collaboration that obviously goes beyond simply the membership of the European Union, that we're back into that.
Have you had any discussions with the university sector, the research sector, about the ongoing changes to immigration policy and salary thresholds and not being able to bring dependents?
Me to pick this up?
Have a go, yeah. Sure.
I mean, Mr. Brown, this is part of the discussions that I have with universities. Scotland, it remains the case that the UK, and particularly Scotland, remains an extremely attractive place for international talent to be based. As you will know, a 2023 IDP report indicated that alongside Canada, Australia and the USA, the UK is one of the most attractive places in the world to study, demonstrating Scotland and the UK's international competitive.
Nobody's expressed any concern about 38,000 salary threshold.
When it comes to attracting the best talent from around the world. Of course, Mr. Brown, the reason why universities in Scotland are facing such a challenge around international students is because of the funding settlement, which makes them overly dependent on international students to top up their fee income because of the decisions the Scottish Government have made about how they fund Scottish universities. If they were funded in a similar way to the rest of the UK, there would not be this over-dependency on international students, and particularly the income that they generate.
If you answer the question I put to you...
Well, that is the point the University of Scotland makes to me.
Nobody expressed any concern about a 38,000 salary threshold for people to come to the UK to work.
University of Scotland are very clear in the discussions that I have with them, together with their member bodies, that the difficult funding settlement the Scottish Government is imposing on them, which results in them over-dependent.
I know you've made the point about the funding settlement.
But for the decisions that the Scottish Government would make, there would not be this dependency on international students.
You've not had any discussions about the UK's immigration policy and the impact that can have?
I have, Mr. Brown, I have had discussions with University of Scotland about this, and they make it very clear to me that because of the very tough funding settlement being imposed by the Scottish Government and the consequential over-dependency on international students is why they're facing this severe financial pressure. I'm sure you have heard from universities directly about the severe pressure they're currently facing because of the funding settlement from the Scottish Government.
Well, I can tell what I've heard directly. I've been approached by constituents who are now worried about their families that are going to actually not be allowed to stay in the UK as a direct consequence of the decision of the UK government.
You're unaware of the difficult. You're unaware of the difficult financial situation that University of Scotland are facing.
Well, I've just given an example of concern that constituency of mine, and obviously I don't have a university in my constituency, and I've still got students that are really impacted and their wider families, and are worried they're going to have to go back to Africa after after hoping to make a home here. So that's the impact
what I hear from my constituents in the Borders and from Borders College, the college sector, the university sector in Scotland, because of the severe cuts being imposed by the Scottish Government on these two sectors, the college sector and the university sector, and as a consequence of the longer term funding settlement which has been imposed by the Scottish Government, they have been overly exposed to international students. Now, we shouldn't be afraid of having, wanting to attract the very best talent, and we are already faring very well on the international stage. And when you compare, as I say, alongside Canada, Australia and the USA, which also have very tough immigration policies, you cannot just simply point the finger at the UK government's new immigration policy and blame that. The issue in Scotland is the funding settlement from the Scottish Government.
Now. You've given the answers you want to give. I'll just go back to the Minister. So, Mr Gifford or Andrew, you rightly said one of the issues about spin-outs, and then that will scale up as access to capital. So you've mentioned that quite a few times about access to capital being an issue. But and although you said there was the Mansion House reforms, how exactly is that access to capital for Scottish spin-outs? What's actually happening to change that and to get them that access to capital that they can stay in Scotland and expand? I just wasn't clear what the solution to the known problem is.
Right, so the desire to get access to spin out and scale up capital in particular is a function of what are the big pools of capital that are available for investment. And we're talking primarily here about venture capital investment, quite high risk investing in new technologies, but technologies that in aggregate will be enormously successful over time. The single largest pool of capital to do that is pension fund capital, and so the Mansion House Compact was an agreement between most of the major United Kingdom, some of them are certainly based in Edinburgh and Glasgow, providers and managers of pension capital to put a little bit more of their overall asset allocation into the sort of illiquid investments, not just the gilts that government sells, but the sort of illiquid investments that trickle their way down into funds putting money into university spin-outs. The government itself said that. So that's the sort of top macro. Pete knows this. The chair knows this.
I just come in on that, though. I mean, pension funds like to invest in what they see as small, steady growth projects where they've kind of guaranteed a return, whereas obviously venture capitalism is about taking a risk. It's about weighing up, but ultimately venture capitalism is where people are more willing to take risk. So how will pension funds fit into that? Because that kind of risk and reward doesn't seem how pension funds usually operate.
Well, they're trying to do two things, if I may, Mr. Brown. They're trying to, in many ways, minimise risk for their pension holders, but also to deliver growth, so that their pensions, when they become due to be paid, often 20 or 30 years later, the pool of capital that they've been managing has grown. And the balance between those two objectives is very much influenced by the sort of regulations that we in this place collectively impose upon them. And so over the last 12 months, the government has reformed some of those regulations to give them a greater leeway to do that. Remember, the biggest thing that they invest in today is debt. They don't invest in risk-taking assets. So the government's reformed some of those regulations. And the Mansion House Compact was an agreement between very large pension funds, those who manage those, to put a very small percentage, just one in every £20 that they manage, into this broad class, not into any one thing, but this broad class of investment. I do think that's right for the UK. I think that is something that we see much more in other markets. There's often questions in this House about why it is that Canadian pensioners, Australian pensioners invest in more of our own growth opportunities than we do. Good for pensioners, but also really good for the sort of innovation.
Leave that there, because I'm really keen to stick
straight into the financial markets.
Yes, indeed. I'm sure we won't stray into any other territory other than the issue at stake with Mr. Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Ministers. The UK Government's written evidence to our inquiry spoke about AI. In particular, the University of Edinburgh is host to the largest pool of AI researchers in Europe and the opportunity that presents, but also comments on the challenges about a rapid increase in AI. I wonder what recommendations would you give to Scottish universities, institutions and sectors about the growth of AI? What have the UK Government looked at so far in international comparisons and how that could be adopted in Scotland? Minister Griffiths, maybe.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Look, the artificial intelligence is one of the key elements of the UK's science and technology framework. So I'm sure everybody is familiar with that, but as part of that, we've set out, this is the recent update that was published, we set out particular sectors that we think offer prodigious growth to the UK economy, that will change the way that we all live and work, and indeed in some cases how long we live our lives. So the first thing I would say is that artificial intelligence is seen as a key growth area. It will provide enormous opportunities both to those that are practitioners, but also in applying that to many of the big problems we face. If we think about climate, for example, a lot of what happens in climate is about a wasteful allocation of resource. An AI algorithm that can come up with new ways of allocating resources, perhaps develop new materials that are lighter, better, offers us a great opportunity when we think about the climate challenge, and that's true of many other domains in life. Now, the UK government has also, as you know, with the Prime Minister's AI Safety Summit, been at the forefront of trying to promote the responsible uses and the mitigation of some of the risks that come along with AI. And so my advice to any organisation or institution in this is there are many opportunities. One of the big enablers of artificial intelligence and that whole subsector is students pursuing STEM in schools and making sure that in things like the PISA rankings of international ability that we continue to drive forward the quality of our education, that in particular STEM gets the right level of focus, and that maths attainment, which again is something the Prime Minister's been very strong in promoting, some level of maths education until the age of 18. All of those are ways that we can all equip our communities well to deploy this technology in a responsible way.
Thank you. Minister Lamont, obviously the evidence from the UK Government echoes what Minister Griffiths has just said there about one of the challenges is the shortage of STEM qualified students. This is something I raised with Minister Day in the earlier session. In your discussions around Scotland with various different sectors, is the shortage of students taking STEM subjects an issue that has been highlighted, and is there anything the UK Government can do with the Scottish Government to increase the numbers taking these subjects and, crucially, increase the number of teachers within those professions?
I think that's a very, very important point, something which has become increasingly concerning to me during my various visits and meetings since I became a minister, in that it's very clear that in terms of our ability in Scotland to create homegrown talent, it is being severely affected by the plummeting standards in Scotland's schools. And you can see that, as we've heard already, through the recent PISA figures, which show that the drop in standards, particularly in math, science and reading since 2018 in Scotland, have dropped significantly, and it's very, very alarming, and particularly in relation to maths and science, which I think are relevant to the discussion today. It shows Scotland continuing to fall back from the top of the league, which is where we were previously. So in terms of, there was a discussion earlier with Mr Brown, who's sadly no longer in his place, about international students. But I think all of us want to see more and more people from Scotland going into this sector. I recently held a STEM skills roundtable, and they highlighted again their concerns from an industry perspective about the lack of STEM skilled candidates in Scotland, which is affecting the aerospace sector, the defence sector, and increasingly the space sector, which we'll know is an important part of the Scottish emerging economy. That's particularly the case for girls going into STEM. So it's a real concern for me and for the government's perspective that Scotland is not at the top of the league compared to where it was before. The other point I should also say, which came out very clearly from the STEM roundtable, in terms of attracting people from overseas to Scotland, the higher rate of taxes in Scotland, as you will know, Mr Ross, Scotland is now the highest tax part of the United Kingdom. And for people looking at where to base themselves, the prospect of paying even more tax compared to what you pay in Carlisle or Berwick is acting as a disincentive. And again, at that round table I had with industry, I think they all pointed to that as being an issue why they weren't able to attract the talent that they might otherwise be able to.
Well, I'd actually written down earlier, you said obviously Scotland is an attractive place for researchers to come and others to come, but there are challenges, and whether it's public services, which 1 in 7 Scots on a waiting list for the NHS, whether it's our once world leading education now falling down international rankings, or Scotland being the highest tax part of the United Kingdom, these are all things I hear as impacting people's decision to come and study and live and stay in Scotland. That is being replicated in the discussions you're having, is that correct?
Absolutely. It's a big concern on a personal level, who's a very proud Scot, to see our nation being dragged downwards, and it's purely because we are not investing in our schools and colleges and universities in the way that we once did. And as I say, from being a Premier League country, we're now down at the second or third league, which I'm sure is an analogy you'll understand.
Yeah, I'm surprised you understand it, given your lack of interest in football. Minister Griffiths mentioned climate, and one of our earlier witnesses spoke to us Dr. Met High of St Andrews University, particularly around some of the discussion about oil and gas. Now, all of us, I think, want to see that sector transition to more renewable green forms of energy, and there are some highly skilled jobs in the sector at the moment. I have a serious concern that the policies of the SNP in government in Scotland, and now the opposition party here, Labour, looks to put that industry towards a cliff edge and stop new exploration for oil and gas almost overnight. And 100,000 jobs at the moment rely on that sector across Scotland, many of them in the North East in the communities Mr Duckett and I represent. What would it mean to that just transition if we lost those jobs and those skills within the oil and gas sector at the moment, who are going to be absolutely crucial to ensuring that just transition and keeping the skills here in Scotland? Because Dr. High, as I say, of St Andrews University, was saying this is a very political issue and it's extremely important that we recognise the individuals in the oil and gas sector at the moment and the role they'll play within science and technology going forward. Minister Griffiths.
Look, I think you make a very good point. As you know, Scotland hosts the offshore renewable energy catapult. It's one of the big Innovate UK interventions. It's at the meeting point between science and business, where entrepreneurship happens, and it's a very important contribution to what research and potential future jobs goes on in Scotland. Now, by their nature, catapults have to work hand in hand with the private sector. It's one of their great strengths because it's able to seamlessly allow research and development to blend into innovation and then across the membrane into forming the businesses of the future that are going to create the jobs that we need and provide the future tax revenues for prosperity. So anything that put jeopardy or the inability of businesses to be able to plan with confidence forward, I would be very concerned that they're part of Scotland's innovation firmament, and that would be I think to the detriment of Scotland if that were to happen.
Mr. Lamb.
No, just to reiterate that point. I mean, during one of my recent roundtables with the oil and gas sector, there's now a real concern that they're not, but because of the very hostile political narrative coming from certain parts of Scottish political parties, that many young people and others who might otherwise have looked at a career in that industry, ultimately moving into the renewable sector as we moved from oil and gas, are just now not looking at that as an option, and they're very, very worried that even going to be able to get the skills they need to develop Rosebank and other opportunities which are clearly there now. But as I say, the hostile environment which has been created for that sector has not been welcomed.
Just finally, if I can, Chair, obviously education is fully devolved, and we've heard from the Higher and Further Education Minister within the Scottish Government today, but much of what we're looking at has a reserved element, including, as we heard right at the very beginning, a lot of the funding. Is there enough collaboration and joint working between the Scottish and the UK governments on this issue? Or do you come against barriers with the Scottish Government saying, well, education is devolved to the Scottish Parliament, therefore the UK Government shouldn't or couldn't get involved? Could there be better working relations across both governments on this important issue? Minister Griffiths.
Look, for my part, it would always be more productive if, rather than people try to litigate settled positions, that everyone engaged themselves wholly to getting the best deal for researchers in Scotland, allowing the money to flow freely, trying to compete on our strengths rather than trying to impose certain quotas or a defensive position. And that is what we seek. I think Scotland's got every reason to want to back itself. The innovation that has historically happened, the strength of the Scottish universities historically. I don't think anyone should approach this topic in a defensive way, but we should all together focus our energies on how we collaborate frictionlessly. And by the way, in the majority of the United Kingdom, this doesn't happen, this debate doesn't happen with a different government. It happens at the level of a university or an institution. And that is how my department is organised and set up and will continue to engage.
Mr. Lamont.
So I think there is so much that could be achieved by the UK government and Scottish government working more closely together. I think generally that does happen, but there's a number of notable examples where it doesn't. So one example that I would point to is around the excellent work that the James Hutton Institute does around gene editing, which you'll be familiar with. I know the committee has visited, which clearly offers huge advantages in terms of crop resilience and also not having to use potentially harmful chemicals on some crops. But because of a decision by the Scottish government, Scottish farmers in that sector are being held back compared to the rest of the UK, which are able to develop that type of tech. So that is an example where we need much better joined up thinking, and so that Scotland is not being held back by, I think, ill-informed decisions by the Scottish government.
And that's very much not just one government saying something against another government. NFU Scotland are very much on the side of allowing these opportunities, backing the UK government on that, and calling out their concerns with the Scottish government.
Indeed.
Thank you both.
Thank you. The UK is ranked now 29th out of 63 countries as a favourable destination for international professions, and that's its lowest ranking for over 5 years. And this is figures which have been designed by the International Institute for the Management Development World Competitive Centre. Why has the UK fallen by these 5 places?
I think Scotland...
I'm not interested. I'm asking, why do you think the UK has fallen those 5 places in this very important league?
Well, the UK and Scotland, which is my focus, continues to be blazing a trail, I think, in terms of scientific research and development.
I know I'm asking a very direct question, and I hope you're going to help me with this. And as a proud Scot, as you said, I'm sure you want to answer the question fully. Why has the UK fallen 5 places in an international league of a desirable place for international professionals?
So the UK remains a...
For me, John, I mean, everyone will have different forms of data. I mean, the data I've looked at from the OECD says that the UK has moved up the attractiveness rankings. We were 16th in 2019. In 2023, we were 7th.
I hope you're not going to question. This is the International Institute for Management Development World Competitiveness Centre.
I'm certainly not questioning. I'm just pointing out there are different studies, and versus
the UK's
what sounds like a commercial organisation. The data I was citing was from the OECD.
Is there any reason why they then have on their league why the UK has fallen 5 places? I mean, the things that I've referenced, I think, are things like Brexit,
on mine it's gone
the immigration
up.
health
Mr.
surcharge.
Chairman, just to clarify, on mine it's gone up. It's not fallen. It's gone up from 16th to 7th. It's increased significantly as an attractiveness destination.
You don't think there's any issue at all about the UK being an attractive destination for international professionals? You think is actually an improving situation?
Well, that's what the OECD data says. I've not, although I have heard some of the comments made by Mr. Brown in the wider university sector. Of course, every sector wants to talk its own book and understandably have the most attractive ability to bring people in. Actually, what the data tells us, as opposed to what people will understandably say and seek to influence outcomes, the data says that around 41% of postgrads are from overseas. I can't think of a country on the planet, perhaps you can, Mr. Chairman, which has such a high attractiveness for people internationally to come here and do their best work.
We shouldn't worry about increases in the cost of living, perceptions around Brexit, the increase in the immigration health surcharge. Everything is fine, and the UK is doing really well in attracting international professions, even though a very respected study has said that the UK's position is at its lowest for 5 years, 29th out of 63 countries which are in this important, and I hope you're not disparaging this research, the important league which has been designed.
I'm not.
You're not offering any suggestions as to why.
I mean, Mr. Chairman, I know you like to talk down the UK and Scotland, but we are very proud champions of Scotland and the UK and what we have to offer. And we know that international students want to come here in large numbers because we remain a very attractive place to study and work. Now, we now have a new immigration policy, which I know you're very hostile towards, but is comparable to other countries like Canada and Australia and USA, which have similarly highly regarded universities and research capacity.
Okay, right, I've tried my best to get an answer to that. We'll leave it just now because I know we haven't got much time. I know you guys have to be away at 4. We now have Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our panellists for being here today. Minister Lamond, you talked about the James Hutton Institute, and indeed when we started even just discussing this inquiry as a committee, we met at the Royal Highland Show and we met in the James Hutton Institute tent to discuss it. But one of the challenges that independent research organisations such as the James Hutton Institute face is that they are more limited in the funding that they can apply for. And I know, Minister Griffiths, you said that it's contestable and apply for it, but one of the reasons why IROs don't apply for funding is because they can't meet the 80-20 funding requirements. Are you aware of this, and what can we do to ameliorate that?
Yeah. Look, the 80-20 funding requirement is a long-standing position. There is within that the element of a public policy decision as to whether you can fund less research in a more concentrated way or get the right balance between other contributors. I can understand that for anybody it would be individually superior for them to have the 100, but by so doing they would be removing the ability for research to happen elsewhere. So it's a classic question that we have to resolve in this place as to how do you allocate scarce resources.
I suppose what I'm asking is obviously they're not universities, so they don't have the student opportunities or the other financial and business management opportunities that other institutions have. So do we recognise in any way that non-level playing field that IROs are facing?
Well, I mean, just to be clear, I think you understand this, but of course it's level across the whole of the United Kingdom. This isn't,
so
it doesn't pertain
to research
to Scotland.
Organisations everywhere.
I mean, clearly, ultimately, the desired outcome is that there are wider benefits to society, typically wider benefits to the business sector from some of the research that takes place, and that offers an avenue for the funding to cover the remaining 20%. And that is something that, by and large, most institutions understand. They're able to run their business models on the back of that. If they're not, in my department, always engage and look at is there something that's not been particularly understood, or is it a particular exception? But you'll appreciate the direct consequence, other than unless you significantly want to increase the cost of the taxpayer and the taxes to fund that, a direct consequence of moving to a 100% funding model would, in aggregate, be that less research would take place.
And I'm not suggesting that. I suppose the challenge here is we know that IROs are in a different position from other institutions, which means that the 80-20 is more difficult. And given what we've already heard today is you want the best quality applications to come forward, and indeed you've suggested that Scottish institutions, when they do come forward, do very well. But what I'm saying, I suppose, is we're in a position where they might have really, really good bids, but are just not in a position to even bring them forward, and that seems unfortunate. It sounds like it's a long-standing policy decision, but I suppose my question is are we looking at how we can address that? Minister Lamont, have you got? I mean, I'm sure you're going to say something about Scottish Government funding, but have you got anything to beyond that? In terms
no,
of
just going to add that I also enjoyed visiting the James Hutton Institute tent at the Highland Show. I think I presented the Best Soil Prize at their event, and I think it's also important to record that the UK government has contributed £45 million towards the International Barley Hub and Advanced Plant and Growth Centre, which will be both situated at the James Hutton Institute. So
how did that funding come about? That didn't come through UKRI funds then, or?
The James Hutton Institute, like many others in Scotland, proactively engaged with the UK government, and Lawrence may have more of the granular detail. We can certainly write to you about the process they went through.
I think that would be really useful, because it sounds like an innovative way that the James Hutton has potentially looked at to fill the gap that we've identified. But I suppose what I don't want is other institutions to be even more set on an unlevel playing field if there's not that degree of there's not those opportunities to make those business cases elsewhere.
I mean, we can follow up with the detail on that one in particular, but they are also part of the growth deal, and there's vertical farming, which I've seen myself there at the James Hutton Institute. So we have quite an active conversation with them from the Scotland Office point of view, and I think they are looking at being creative, and we're working creatively with them to explore different kinds of funding solutions.
So certainly another thumbs up in relation to city deals and funding and working more collaboratively. Thank you. So my second question, and again, you mentioned coming to Edinburgh and Glasgow, Minister, but I hope you'll get to University of St Andrews as well. You had to expect me to say that. But the Science and Technology Framework came about as a result of, or partly as a result of, the nurse report. And I think it would be fair to say that University Scotland and the University of St Andrews did express some concerns about, or just not so much concerns, but they did outline some comments in relation to particularly the target around that 40% increase in domestic public investment outside the south-east of England in terms of how that will be achieved. Can you tell me what your expectations are from a Scottish perspective of that increase?
I would expect Scotland to benefit from that, to be clear. I think I fully accept the critique of the Nurse Review and others that we've had too much concentration in London and the South East. Thereafter, it is not the government's approach, nor do I personally think it would be additive to set individual targets or quotas. There is an enormous latent potential in science and research. It is right that we seek to address that by consciously managing it, effectively, by tracking that. There's a richness of data. One of the things that we have to challenge with the bureaucracy review is, one person's bureaucracy is another person's data, and not driving for equity for its own sake, but so that we can actually see what is going on. So I think there should be opportunities for Scotland. It would be wrong to put a number on it, and I think again we should all have the confidence to back
it would be
ourselves.
fair that usually when people come in front of the ministers come in front of this committee, we're expecting to see some kind of degree of parity around Scotland's population. Would that be fair?
I mean, it is not the no. I don't think it would be fair. I mean, I think. Research funding is ideas and innovation driven. It is the responsibility of the institutions themselves to apply. That's not a controllable variable, but obviously institutions do have.
But with your new news around clusters and mapping, that does suggest that there's a bit of a concentration of Scotland, so you would want to see good results.
There are certainly some fantastic opportunities in Scotland. If I look at space, with only 2 out of 3 of the UK's spaceports, in quantum, where there's already one of the quantum hubs in engineering biology. I mean, I certainly think Scotland is well positioned, and there are many opportunities in areas that map directly across to the science and technology framework.
And we've heard that in our space inquiry as well, to be honest. Minister Lamont, if I can come to you to conclude. Sorry,
I can just put a bit more detail on that. As the Minister said earlier as well, I think applications from Scottish researchers tends to outperform the kind of the UK average. But even just looking at the investments, we have the innovation accelerators in Glasgow, just 1 of 3. We've got programs like the Strength in Places Fund that recognise the capabilities within Scotland, and that has invested about 82 million in precision medicine, in digital.
And we visited the National Robotarium as part of the inquiry as well.
Exactly. And on the talent front, when we're talking about AI, for example, 3 AI centres for doctoral training are going to be in Scotland, 2 in Edinburgh and 1 in Heriot Watt. So it's not just about the particular programs, the collective set of investments that just recognise the strengths.
And I think the ask here from the institution is to go for it in that regard then as well. If I can just come to Minister Lamont just to conclude, we've had the Scottish Government Minister on earlier. We've talked about what the UK Government is doing. But what do you see the role of the Scotland Office in relation to that coordination? Because that need for coordination is something that's come quite strongly through in the evidence from the institutions that we've spoken to.
It's very, very important, and it's not just in this policy area, it's across the board. The job of the Scotland Office and my colleagues there is to coordinate different parts of the UK Government, working with the Scottish Government to achieve the best outcomes for Scotland. I mean, we are the Scottish voice at the heart of the UK Government.
Right, thank you. I know David wants to come in. A quick question before you guys have to head off.
Yeah, just very quickly in the last 3 minutes. A lot of what I was going to ask has already been asked, so that's going to save some time. Douglas Ross spoke about the importance of the oil and gas industry in not only continuing to produce oil and gas for as long as we need it, but to be part of that energy transition into the renewable future. And I'm just wondering, is that something, that whole new discipline, if you like, of actually going through the process of transition, is that being seen as something that we need to innovate in, and potentially an innovation cluster in itself, perhaps centred around the northeast of Scotland, perhaps?
Well, the potential, I mean, clusters are organic as well as inorganic. So clusters can result from something like the offshore renewable energy catapult, but they're also the function of markets, of businesses themselves coming up with the innovation. And you make a very powerful point, and as I'm sure this committee knows, the feedstocks of, both literally and metaphorically, of the new technologies that are going to change the world and create huge opportunities come from precisely the oil and gas industry. So anybody would be foolish to put jeopardy in its way at their peril when that is so important to the innovation economy, to the UK's aspirations to be a science and technology superpower, and it's going to provide the literal fuel for many of the new opportunities, some of which are supported by my department, many of which fall out with that in departments like DESNES.
And I take it from your responses earlier and those of Minister Lamont that you would agree with the University of Scotland that it's important that the two governments, UK government and Scottish government, work together to develop these clusters. But again, maybe just to give Minister Lamont the last word, are these innovation clusters likely to form part, or the negotiations or discussions around these innovation clusters likely to form part of the same negotiations around the investment zones?
Well, that was my answer. I think the investment zone will be an opportunity to develop that cluster idea or concept further.
Perfect.
We have ended perfectly on 5 o'clock for you, gentlemen. I think there's a couple of things you said you'd get back to us about, and we'll look forward to hearing that from you for this afternoon. Thank you very much for coming along to the Scottish Affairs Committee. Order, order.